Hello, everybody. This is Linda K. Klein. I'm really excited to talk with you today about how to craft a compelling pitch. So a little bit about me. I've actually worked in the intersection of storytelling and social entrepreneurship for 15 years, but a lot of folks don't know that about me because I'm best known as the author of a book called Pure: Inside the Evangelical Movement that Shamed a Generation of Young Women and Others, that's not part of the title, and how I broke free. Really, though, it's not just my story. It's based on 16 years of interviews that I've done with people who were raised in purity culture, and more specifically in the purity movement that was born out of the white American evangelical Christian church. So when the book came out, I just was inundated with requests from readers for resources to help them to heal from the deep sexual shame, fear, and anxiety that purity culture had engendered. And so I first launched a nonprofit in response to that. The nonprofit is called Break Free Together, and we use storytelling to help people to heal from religious trauma, particularly as it pertains to sex and gender. And then I later launched a business as well. I actually provide individual coaching for people who are recovering from purity culture. So in other words, I too am a social entrepreneur. But I've also spent many years, as I mentioned, working in the field. I spent 2 years as a fellow in the NYU Reynolds program in social entrepreneurship. Spent 5 years working at Echoing Green, which is a leading early stage social entrepreneurship incubator. I say early stage, I think a little later than this particular incubator, but still relatively early stage. But at the end of the day, I really consider myself first and foremost a storyteller for social change. So I've spoken to over 100 audiences. I've been featured by the media over 150 times. I've been a director of communications for 2 nonprofits, and I do storytelling consulting. And I often work with faith-based social entrepreneurship incubators such as yours. I've worked, if you are familiar with them, with FTE's Do Good X program, Princeton Seminary's Design Lab, the Baltimore Methodist Conference's Changemakers Project, and many others. And very often what I'm focusing on when I'm working with social entrepreneurs is on the pitch, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So today, we will cover the 5 most critical elements of a successful pitch, in my humble opinion, and how you can tailor your pitch for each individual audience to whom you present anytime that's possible. So grab a pen and paper, or maybe open up a Word or a Google Doc or whatever you do. You will want to take notes during this workshop because your homework will be to craft a pitch. So you'll want to make sure that you take down all those 5 points that I mentioned and any details that will be helpful to you. And of course, craft that pitch specifically for an audience that we'll be identifying together during our workshop. And there is also an interactive element of this workshop toward the end. So you're going to want to have that pen and paper or that document open for that as well. But please stay present. I know that it's going to be just me on the screen and you are going to be tempted to toggle. I get it. I really, really do. I'm going to try to vary my voice and whatever else I can do to keep you relatively entertained so that you can really stick with it, because this is some important stuff. All right. You're here because you have an idea on how to make the world a better place. Now, I know you all, most of you are early stage, so it's very possible your idea is still taking shape. That's very common among the people that I work with. It might even feel kind of premature to be writing a pitch, that is okay. We're going to talk a little bit more about what a pitch is in a minute, by the way. But if it feels premature to be writing whatever you think a pitch is, right, that's fine. You're not committing to the details of your idea that you flesh out in your pitch. Just use this drafting process to really ask and answer with a possible answer, some really big questions. You might even ask yourself, is this really what I want to do as you're writing your pitch, right? Is this the best way to do it? What's really behind my desire to do this? Through the drafting process, you might even discover that your idea shifts, your idea changes. That's healthy and really, really good. You might even discover this is not the idea that you want to pursue. I'm writing it and my soul is not on fire. I am not excited about this. Or I'm writing it and I'm realizing, yeah, I'm excited about this, but honestly, I don't think anyone else is going to be. It doesn't meet a need. This might just be something that only I care about in my community. So let the drafting process reveal to you various things, and see this process as really just the very beginning of a much longer engagement. Okay. Now, you might also be coming to this workshop, as many early stage social entrepreneurs are, with multiple ideas. You're not quite sure which of them you're going to pursue. Totally normal, right? So for the sake of today's workshop, I just want you to choose one idea that you're going to focus on. We're not going to get to the working with your idea stage until a little bit later. So you have some time, but if your different ideas have different audiences in particular, you're definitely going to want to just choose one for the sake of this workshop. Again, you may discover in the process, this is not the idea I want to work on, or that this absolutely is the idea that you want to work on. So, let it be a process of discovery. As promised, I want to talk about what is a pitch. So a pitch sounds really like kind of gross in a lot of ways, right? I'm going to be pitching this to you as though it's a manipulation or a trick or something sleazy, like a the sort of stereotypical idea of a used car salesman who isn't telling you the whole story, right? That's not what a pitch is. A pitch is essentially just the story of your project. That's it. They can vary anywhere from a minute long to 10 minutes long. And really, your pitch, as I mentioned before, should be tailored to your specific audience. And that includes how long you make that pitch. If you are at a party and someone's like, so what do you do? Great opportunity for you to tell them about your project, right? But you probably don't want to launch into a 10-minute pitch. It might be inappropriate. But a 1-minute description could be fantastic, Meanwhile, if you are asked to present to your church about your project, a 10-minute pitch would be really appropriate for that moment, right? So in general, however, I would recommend that you have a shorter pitch kind of in your back pocket. I generally recommend about a 3-minute pitch. I think that Scent is going to have you do a 1-minute pitch. That works too, that you can kind of pull out at a moment's notice. It's your general version. It's not your tailored to an audience. It's this will work in a pinch, right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about that. I once was working with a social entrepreneurship incubator, and there was a social entrepreneur who had an idea that I thought was really exciting. And I was actually going to be going to her town. I was going to DC, which is where she lived. And I had some friends there who I thought would be really interested in her idea and may potentially even be able to help. So I invited her to join us, and we had a nice big breakfast. And the breakfast was going along well. Everyone was chatting about a number of different things. And then the moment kind of arose where my friends kind of paused and said to the table, or to her, quieting the table, so Linda tells us that you have a project that you have been working on. We would love to hear more about it. And she kind of hemmed and hawed, and you could tell she felt really uncomfortable. And she didn't quite know what to say, and the silence got a little awkward. And then I leaned over to her. I was sitting next to her, and I said, just give them your pitch. Now, again, pitch sounds gross. You wouldn't want to do that at a breakfast table with new friends. But she gave the pitch, exactly her 3-minute pitch, word for word as she had memorized it. But she did it in a conversational way, the way that you would present if you were talking to people at a, breakfast table. And at the end of the pitch, the table just exploded with energy. Everyone had ideas for her in terms of who she should talk to, in terms of potential partners. It just was an incredibly generative conversation that came out of this 3-minute pitch. So it's important for you to just always have that in your back pocket, because you never know when you might need to pull it out. All right. Let's talk first about the 5 most critical elements of a successful pitch. First, I'm just going to name them, and then we'll go into more detail on each one. The first is the problem. You need to have clearly stated, the problem that your pitch or that your project is addressing. The second is the solution. So the solution is your project, right? We'll talk more about that later. The third is the why me, why you're the person to bring this project to life. The fourth is the ask, what do you need now? And then the fifth is a story. You want to be able to move people. All right, let's talk about problem. It's important for you to illustrate that your project either addresses a problem or meets a need, right? It might fill an existing gap in services. That's another way to talk about it. So by clearly stating what that problem is, what that need is, you're letting them know this isn't just a great idea. You know, this is something that people will engage with. This is something that people want. This is something that people need, you know? It's the sort of, if I build it, they will come. Oftentimes I find that early stage social entrepreneurs I work with, when they're thinking about what the problem is, they start really, really big, which makes sense, right? They might name the problem as racism, or a broken education system, or poverty, right? These are really big problems. So when you're stating a problem in your pitch, you don't want your audience to be overwhelmed by the problem. You know, neither do you, in fact, want to be overwhelmed by the problem. So you want to get as specific as possible, right? So let's use racism. Racism, for example, has a number of problems that you could address within that category, right? There's the erasure of history, there's implicit bias, all kinds of things that could be the specific element of racism that you want to address. And even within those are a number of more specific problems. So let's say you're looking at implicit bias. Are you looking at implicit bias among police? Are you looking at implicit bias among doctors and hospital workers? Are you looking at implicit bias among educators, right? Each of these are their own, they would require their own specific interventions to address, right? So the more specific that you can possibly be, the better. If you present to someone, I'm working on the problem of implicit bias among police officers, right? That's something that people can really wrap their heads around and understand. Okay, I can see that this is something that, yes, is a massive problem still, but one that I can understand in scope, right? If you were to say, you know, the police of this particular community, okay, I can understand that even more, right? So get as specific as you can. Now, in all reality, your work probably addresses multiple problems. That's really, really good. You can't present every single problem your work addresses to your audience, though. Again, they'll become overwhelmed. Just as kind of a side note, when you do messaging with people, oftentimes people will use what's called a messaging triangle, and you'll have kind of 3 key points that you train people to keep coming back to again and again. If you actually watch, this comes up all the time in interviews, like if you're watching the news and you see a pundit be interviewed, or somebody who's representing you know, an issue. It doesn't matter what the journalist asks. The journalist can ask any number of questions, but they keep giving the same 3 topics. They keep coming back to the same 3 topics. Chances are they did a messaging circle and they knew, okay, I'm only going to make 3 points. Now, why do people train folks to have 3 key points that they come back to again and again? It's because, generally speaking, that's all that an audience can hold. You could give 10 incredible points. Your audience will not hold 10 points, no matter how incredible they are. We really only have the capacity to hold about 3 or 4 tops, right? So that's why I say it's very possible that your work addresses multiple problems, right? But for the sake of your generic pitch, you want to choose one problem, maybe because it's the most compelling, or because it's the one that matters to you the most, right? Though when you tailor your pitch for a specific audience, you might actually pull out that problem and put in another problem that you know would speak to that particular audience, and be more compelling to them than the previous problem that you would have presented if it was for a more generic audience. All right. The problem that you present and the way in which you present it should be setting people up for, and this is the next aspect of the compelling pitch, the solution. All right, the solution is in this workshop just shorthand for your project. So the language of solution is very complicated. I just want to state that, and tell you why I'm using it anyway. First of all, there's no such thing as solution in the vast majority of cases, right? Many of us are addressing issues that will not be solved in our lifetimes. And they certainly will not be solved with the introduction of one new organization or one new campaign or one new project, right? Also, solutions often come with problems. I once heard someone say that a solution brings a new set of hopefully better problems, right? It's not that we're ever going to eradicate, poverty, perhaps. And I hope we do. But if we bring an intervention that addresses it, though, we might be eradicating some aspect of it and creating some new things that need to be dealt with that are hopefully better things to deal with in our larger goal of eradicating poverty. Okay, so we're using the language of solution despite those challenges because I want you to see the connection between the problem that you're presenting, or again, problem might not be the right word for you either. The need you're addressing might be another one. The gap you're filling might resonate with you more. But the reason I'm using the language of problem and the language of solution is because those two so clearly go together. And it's important that the way that you present your work is as a solution to a problem. We want it to be sort of the 1-2 punch, right? So just wanted to give you a little bit of information on that so that you know where I'm coming from there. All right, when you're presenting your solution, you want to be able to give them enough information about your project that they believe that it could really help address the problem that you presented. But you don't want to give them so much information that they get lost. Generally speaking, when I'm working with early stage social entrepreneurs, I find that they fall into the former category more than the latter. There are some people who have just spent so much time working on the details of their work and they're so excited about it that they present way too much detail in their pitch. But that's generally not the case, particularly with early stage folks, right? Early stage folks are more likely to give too little information about their project than too much. In many cases, because they're still figuring out the details of their work. Sometimes people use really big words in an attempt to hide the fact that they don't really know what they're going to do yet. It always feels like a red flag to me when I hear someone be like, my project is an innovative solution to this project or to this problem that is going to transform people's lives, right? It begs a lot of questions to the listener. What's the innovation? How is this different? What do you mean it's innovative? What's the transformation? What are you actually going to be doing? And how will it be transforming people? How will it actually impact people's lives, right? So even if you don't quite know what you're going to be doing, give us enough information about what you think you might do that we can wrap our heads around it. If you're doing an after school program, tell us a little bit about what would happen. Maybe it doesn't exist yet, so you're not entirely sure what would happen. I get that, right? But use this again as an opportunity to try on some things. Give us enough information as a listener that we can understand at least what the vision is, right? All right, the next section is called Why Me? As an early stage social entrepreneur, it's important for you to know that your donors, your advocates, your volunteers, they're not actually investing in your idea. They probably know that your idea is so brand new that it needs to be tested before they'll know whether it works or not. So they're not actually investing in the idea. They're primarily investing in you. They want to know that you have a shot at making this project work, because they believe that this idea could work if you are the one to bring it. They're not going to invest in just anyone bringing that project. Oftentimes the first stage of donors for a new organization, they really come in expecting the new organization to evolve and to change and to ask really big questions of themselves, and of the best way to really address the problem that they're working to address. So a donor of an early stage organization, might give you money for a particular vision, but often wouldn't be too surprised if you came back to them and said, we started out on that vision, and here's what we learned along the way, and here's how we've pivoted as a result of those learnings, right? Oftentimes that is fine with donors. Again, what they care about is you. They want to know that you are committed, that you are resilient, that you are going to ask the big questions, that you aren't going to avoid the hard stuff, that you're going to be transparent, that you're going to be authentic, and that you're going to keep showing up and doing the work day after day, as you can figure this out of what will work best. So, as a result, it's important that in your pitch, you talk about yourself. This is something that can make a lot of people nervous or uncomfortable, and I completely understand that. You can talk about yourself, though, in a couple of different ways. First of all, you can illustrate your commitment to the work by talking about your experience with the problem. So you can talk about your own story, how you perhaps have experienced this problem in your own life. Or you can take a personal approach that isn't quite that close to home, right? You could talk about seeing this problem, be faced by a loved one, maybe your best friend, maybe your child. You can talk about this being a problem that members of your spiritual community face, for example, and tell a story, that involves you, but in which it might not be you in the center, right? You can also talk about your experience with the solution. You might tell about, I was able to help a congregant perhaps address the issues around addiction using this method. And then afterward, I thought, why am I just bringing this to this one congregant? It was so transformative in their life. I could be bringing this to more people, right? So maybe it's about the experience with the solution. Again, you're in the story, right? And we understand your commitment to the issue via the story, even if you're not the center of the story. But also you can talk about yourself through the lens of expertise. So you might have expertise in the problem area. Maybe you've been studying it for years. Maybe you've been working in that area for years. You might have expertise in the solution that you're presenting. Maybe there are relevant degrees you should mention or years of experience that you should mention. Let's say you're designing a new educational program. Probably worth mentioning it if you have 20 years of experience as an educator, right? Let's say that you are developing a new business, right? A new social business. Probably worth mentioning if you have an MBA, right? Let us know why we can trust you, either because it is clear from your story that you have a heart for this issue so strong that we know you're going to weather the storm, and it will be stormy. Launching a new endeavor like this will inevitably come with storms, right? Or, because you have such a strong expertise in this area that we can really trust you to be weathering the storm, right? Or ideally both, right? Maybe you have both personal experience and some expertise that you can tell us about. Next, you want to have an ask, a strong ask. This is about knowing what you need in order to succeed and getting comfortable with voicing it to others. This is an area that folks in the social entrepreneurship space often, not always, but often struggle with. It's hard. It's hard to ask for something. It's particularly hard to ask for money, right? That's real, and I understand, right? As somebody who is a social entrepreneur, I understand. But it's really, really important that you can not only know what you need, but that you can name what you need and you can voice what you need, because otherwise there's no way you're going to get it. So like your problem statement, it's important when it comes to ask for you to get as specific as you possibly can. So I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions when you're thinking about your ask, what to present as an ask. I want you to think about what you need now to help you get to the next stage, not what you're eventually going to need that you're really, really excited about, right? Not what you're going to need in a year if everything goes great over the course of the next 12 months, right? What do you need now that's going to help you not get to the big completed ultimate vision, right? But that's going to help you to get to the next stage that will ultimately be a pathway to your vision. One of the reasons you want to do that is because, first of all, let's say that your ultimate vision is that you're going to have this big space where all these amazing things happen. And maybe you get it, but you're not ready for a big space because you're still developing all the things, right? So then you're sitting on a big space, right? But also, as I said, you can expect your work to evolve. You can expect it to change. You can expect it to reveal itself to you as you do the work. So you want to make sure that you're getting to the next step and not getting too attached to the 5-year plan or even the 1-year plan if you're really early stage, so that you really have an opportunity to fully live out the now, the very next, and really then evaluate and see what your next is going to be, right? The other thing that I want to encourage you to consider as you think about your ask is to think beyond money. That's often the first thing that people go to. I say, what do you need now? And they say money. Hey, I understand, right? But oftentimes money is a little tougher for an early stage social entrepreneur to get because they don't have the track record to prove that their project is going to work, to be effective, to create an impact, to create transformation, to create change, right? So think a little bit about what you would be using that money for. Maybe your answer to the question of what do I need is $100,000. Okay, so what would you use that for? Maybe you would use that to hire somebody to work with you to get more money. Maybe you would use that money to get photography equipment for your after school program. Maybe you would use that money for a space, right? So if you were to instead actually name those things, right? If you were to say, what do I need now? I need consulting on grants and how to or earned revenue, right? I need consulting on someone who can help me bring in money. What do I need now? I need access to a space, et cetera. You might be surprised by who in the room might have access to those things, though they might not have access to cash that they can give you. You might have someone in the room who works for a photography company who can give you tons of free cameras, from the company, but they can't give you a ton of cash for it. So get really specific about what you need and name it even beyond the dollar amount. And if there are still some things that you just need straight cash for, be really specific about what the dollar is. Fifth point, and perhaps the most important actually, is your story. This is something that that I think gets left off of a pitch oftentimes, particularly when the pitch is really short. It is hard. It is hard to tell a story in a really brief period. So story could be long, right? But maybe even story is 2 sentences, but still it's something that moves people. It's something that that puts people into a heart space. So Maya Angelou said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. It's important in your pitch that you make people feel, not just think, not just sort of logic out, but really feel, because that feeling is what's going to make them want to take a risk and get behind you. Now, as we were talking about before, when we were talking about the why me, that might mean sharing some of your own story. It might mean sharing the story of someone else who's given you permission to share their story, right? Maybe that story is of a heartbreaking experience with, the problem, or a really inspiring story of someone's experience with the solution that you're presenting. Something that makes the audience care at the end of the day. Again, you can do it in 2 sentences, or you can do it in 2 minutes. You could use 2 of your 3 minutes or 2 sentences of your 1 minute, but you gotta make people care. And there they are. These are the 5 most critical elements of a successful pitch: problem, solution, why me, ask, and story. Now I want to talk a little bit about audience. As I said, it's important to have a general version of your pitch, right? But oftentimes you are going to be presenting for specific audiences, and you'll know in advance when you're presenting to those audiences, in which case it's important for you not to use that general pitch. And I've been there, I've done that before. I've used sort of my general pitch for an audience that I should have tailored it to, and it has not gone well, right? It can be tempting to say, oh, I've got my general pitch, I'll just use it for them, right? Always wise to tailor your pitch to your specific audience. So maybe in the tailored version that you're presenting, you're not going to present that social issue that you normally present as the problem. Maybe the problem you're going to pitch to a particular audience is a problem that means a lot to them. Maybe it's not the reason you're doing the work, but it's the reason that you think they might support the work. Maybe the story your pitch features changes. Maybe the person who you talk about in the pitch becomes a person that this audience knows, or the type of person that this audience knows well, right? And that they really care about. So you want to kind of think about all of these elements and kind of plug and play, as they say, right? Pull out the pieces that won't resonate with this audience and put in pieces that might. So I promised an interactive element, and I want to go interactive this year on the subject of audience. Last year, we went interactive on the subject of problem and solution, making sure that those matched. And maybe I'll just briefly say the reason I did that last year was because oftentimes I find that people's problem and solution don't match. People present this problem and then they present this quote unquote solution, and they don't actually, it's not that 1-2 punch that we talked about. So that's again why I use the language of problem solution, because I want you to make sure that the one sets the other up. But this year I want to talk about audience because it is so important to make sure that you are thinking about your audience every time you present, unless of course you find yourself in a proposition to present at a last moment, right? In which case you have your backup. So pull out that piece of paper or open that document if you haven't already, and I'm going to have you do something a little bit interactive. So the first thing I want you to do, I'm going to give you just 1 minute to do this, and I'm going to turn off my camera for that 1 minute. But I want you to list the various audience groupings to whom you may be pitching. You may find that you will be pitching to your board, to your congregation. If your project is a partnership with a school, you might have to present to the school board or to a group of teachers. If your project is for youth, in your congregation, you might have to present it to those youth or to their parents, right? So think about all the different audience groupings that you may present your pitch to. I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to give you 1 minute, and I want you just to be generative. So to name as many as you possibly can, just write them all down, all your different possible audiences. All right, we are coming back. All right, I want you to now look at all the different audiences, and I want you to circle the audience group that you know you need to get on board early on, or this project is just never going to get off the ground. Maybe you need the approval of your church board. Maybe you need the buy-in of that congregation. Who do you need to get on board early on to be able to move forward? All right, now that you've circled that group, I want you to think of one individual from that audience grouping that represents the group well. And in particular, when I say represents the group well, I'm talking about represents the group well in terms of how receptive they might be to this project. So you don't want the individual that you think of to be the person who is going to be low-hanging fruit for you, right? Who's going to be the easiest to bring on, the easiest to convince that this is a great thing to pursue. Nor do you want to select the person who's going to be the hardest to bring on. So somebody who's kind of in the middle, might not be gung-ho about the idea, but isn't going to be the most shut down either. All right, so go ahead and write that individual's name down. Okay, and you can underline it, you can circle it, whatever you want. We are going to create a small psychographic for that individual. All right, a psychographic. What's a psychographic? It's sort of like the demographics of the individual's psychology. This is my own definition that I'm offering right now. But essentially, we're going to figure out what matters to that individual, right? What scares them, what excites them. We're going to understand the inside of that individual, or endeavor to try and understand the inside of that individual. Now, we're going to focus on that individual who is going to be different from the other members of the group, undoubtedly. And so, we're really going to focus on what their individual answers are going to be to these questions I'm going to ask you to help us draw the psychographic. However, they're going to be a representative of the larger group, and that's why we're looking at them. We're looking at them to represent the larger group. So you can imagine not pitching to the whole group, but when you craft your pitch tailored to this audience, imagine crafting it tailored to this individual. All right. So I'm going to have you do 3 different categories underneath this person's name. The first category is pain points. And again, I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I'm going to turn that camera off. And I want you to list the various pain points that this individual has as it pertains to your spiritual community. So maybe a pain point for them is that there is a division in your congregation around a particular issue. Or maybe they're concerned about the dwindling number of congregants. And within that, get specific. Somebody could be concerned about dwindling congregants because they're really concerned about salvation, whereas someone else could be actually really concerned about what that's going to do to the donation plate, right? Will we have enough money to survive, with fewer and fewer people? How are we going to pay for that hole in the roof? Maybe they're really worried about money at the end of the day. So I want you just to brainstorm their pain points and what's beneath their pain points. And again, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'm going to turn that camera off. All right, I'm bringing you back a little earlier than 3 minutes just because I want to make sure that you have more time to work on this later, right? We're just getting you started today. So now I want you to have a space underneath the pain points, and we're going to come back to that space later. So leave that space. And then we're going to have our next heading, which is going to be catalysts for inspiration. We want to know what inspires this individual, again, particularly as it pertains to your spiritual community. What makes them smile? What makes them, if the pain points are what keeps them up at night, the catalysts for inspiration is what makes them want to get out of bed in the morning as it pertains to your spiritual community. All right, we'll take a little bit of time, to about as long as we took on the pain points, to brainstorm this. Okay, and once again, leave a space underneath these catalysts for inspiration. And now we're going to have our third heading, which is internal obstacles. What are the obstacles inside this person that might make them hesitant to support your project, right? Maybe they have a very traditional definition of ministry and it does not include this project. Maybe they don't feel like we should be serving people outside of our congregation. We have enough work cut out for ourselves inside the congregation. Why do anything that would serve anyone outside of it, right? Maybe they're risk averse. They're just very nervous about trying something new. Change is hard for them. And the idea of supporting something, a new approach to healing that they may not have seen work before is really scary. So list some internal obstacles, or another way to put it is some questions or concerns that they might have about your project. And we will take a bit of time for you to do that as well. I'm going to turn the camera off. All right, we are back. Now we're going to go to those spaces that you left under those three headings. And I'm going to give you some time, and I want you to fill in each of these three spaces that you have. Under pain points, I want you to name just one way that your project may alleviate one of their pain points, right? Maybe they're worried about dwindling congregation. Could your project bring some new folks in? Just as an example. I also want you to list underneath the catalyst for inspiration one way that your project may offer them hope. Maybe they're inspired by kids, right? Is there something that you can offer, some frame on how kids' lives might be impacted by your work, even if you're not working with kids per se, right? Maybe you're working with adults, but we all know that adults have massive impacts on the lives of those who are watching them, right? Internal obstacles, I want you to write one way that you can preemptively address one of their internal obstacles before they even bring it up. So in other words, you can address a question, address a concern that they might have, even potentially within your pitch before they even bring it up. So I'm going to give you some time, just one under each category. This is just a brainstorm. This is just to get you started, right? You're welcome to keep on doing this later. In fact, I encourage it. All right, coming on back again. And there you are. You have the beginning of some thoughts on how to tailor this to your audience. So we're ready to give you some homework. Your homework is to write a first draft of a pitch for your project, tailored to your specific audience that you identified, unless you discovered in this project process that that isn't the audience that you want to pitch to first, in which case you can switch it up. This is going to be a draft. It does not have to be perfect. A draft should never be seen as anything other than what it is, right? As I have often heard it said, writing is editing. And in order to edit, you gotta have a first shot. So this is just a first shot of a draft. It's an opportunity for you to put something up on Blackboard, say, okay, here's something for your group to respond to offer you encouragement around, to offer you insights around, to let you know what they're confused by, to let you know what questions they have, etc. And for you to see. Oftentimes I find that once I write a draft, from beginning to end, I give it a couple of days, I come back to it, even I can see what I should have done. But I couldn't have done that if I didn't have something complete to put in front of myself. So make sure that your draft ideally has all of these various things that we talked about, that it has a clearly stated problem and solution. Again, recognizing that those words might not work for you, and I completely understand. So you'll use the words that work for you, but a need and something that meets that need, whatever works for you. So a problem, a solution, why me, an ask, a story, and all of it tailored to a particular audience. You can do this. All right, folks, have a great day.